All I wanna do is come running home to you, come running home to you. All my life I promise to keep running home to you, keep running home to you.
Bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and get the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. I actually didn't notice the art change until probably a third of the way through the service, and I turned around and was like, Dave. Thank you.
Amen.
Amen.
Why was there an art change? Because we have been going through a series on the Beatitudes from the Sermon on the Mount. And admittedly, it has been a difficult series so far. Amen? Jesus is revealing God's saving plan for the world through this Sermon on the Mount. And so we found ourselves having to ask ourselves very difficult questions about our faith walk, our discipleship, even the reason we became Christian in the first place. As your pastor, I need to be listening to what God is asking me to preach, and also to how this congregation is receiving it. Last week, after I finished the sermon for Beatitude number 4, I asked our congregation, all of you, to reflect on some things. And when I sat down, I heard what sounded like the north wind blowing, or rain on the roof, or something like that, which was really the rustling of bulletins. Now, while I'm sure you were perhaps looking at some of the take-home reflection questions, the bulk of the congregation was clearly to move on to the final hymn. This was the first time that I, in thinking about this, had heard that sound during this sermon series. And what it sounded to me, and how I interpreted it later, was you gave me a collective no when I asked you to reflect. You said, we're full. We're not reflecting on this, and I get it. I said in the beginning, this series is difficult. I told you it was going to be difficult, and to be honest with you, I'm still asking myself questions from the first sermon, right? About dropping ego and kingdom of heaven and stuff, yes? So, again, as your pastor, trying to be sensitive as to how this series is being received, I decided to take a little break from the Beatitudes for a few weeks. We're going to pick them up again after Easter. Everybody still show up. In the meantime, we're going to look at the parable of the prodigal son, because I think it can help us in our understanding of the Beatitudes overall. Jesus is explaining, both through the Beatitudes and both through the parables, a new way of being, a new way of acting that goes against what we think we are supposed to do, or what we've been taught to do, or what society tells us to do, and in so doing, bring about the kingdom of God. The parable of the prodigal son is the perfect story for Jesus to illustrate what he meant. So let's take a look. The parable itself is very familiar. Amen? The takeaway is familiar. Traditionally, the takeaway is we can go our own way, but no matter how far off the mark we go, God always welcomes us back home. Yes? Loves us unconditionally. Yes?
Yes.
Forgives us unconditionally. Yes?
Yes.
That's valid. I have preached this sermon that way as long as I can remember. But what if, since we're imagining the Beatitudes in a different way, we look at it through the same lens in which we're viewing the Beatitudes? That perhaps Jesus, in relating God's saving plan for us, has something else embedded in this beautiful story of forgiveness. there was a man who had 2 sons. He was probably a farmer. He not only hired workers working for him, but he also had slaves. So let's revise that first statement and go back. There was a very wealthy landowning patriarch who had 2 male heirs. In first century Palestine, there were very few land owners. This is because land was kept within families. It was passed down through the sons. Marriages between cousins and relatives was encouraged so that land could be kept within the family. Landowners, patriarchs like this father, held a huge responsibility in the village for setting norms, for keeping with traditions and customs, for creating and upholding laws that would keep things in check. In other words, these landowners were not just complicit in the systems, they intentionally perpetuated the systems in order to keep wealth, security, and power where it belonged, with them. So when his son comes to him and says, "Give me my share of the inheritance," now it's not just a big deal because the father might be hurt emotionally that the child wants to leave home. This is how we, as modern moms and dads, often interpret the scene. It's a big deal because the son is breaking the rules of the system. He's breaking the laws of the community and the laws and ethos of the life of his powerful father. His father's money now will be spent elsewhere, in Gentile territory, not within the bounds and bordering of the Jewish people. This meant disgrace in the eyes of the village for the son, yes, but also for the father. This meant for the father, he would now be forced to abide by the rules and system that he had set up. No doubt, after the son left home, the father faced questions from the other landowners and powerful people. No doubt there was some gossip. No doubt it was assumed that the father had somehow lost control of this disobedient son. And though no one would shame him to his face, no doubt there was talk. Thank goodness we've evolved, right? Time passes, things go somewhat back to normal for the community, for the father, for the family. Things are anything but normal for the son. He ran for the inheritance money on wild living, right? Most of us, when we're desperate and we've run out of money, can't find work and is starving, comes to his senses. Epiphany, and he wants to come home. However, because of the systems in place, the son knows that when he comes home, it will have to be as a servant or even a slave, if he's allowed back home. Now, this is not because he thinks that the father will reject him, or that the father is so unforgiving and that perhaps he's no longer loved. He thinks this because this is the rule of the system. Once a son did what he did, left the Jewish community and lost everything to the Gentiles or unbelievers, the outsiders, there truly was no return to the family or the village. Kenneth Bailey, author of Cross and the Prodigal, explains that if a Jewish son lost his inheritance among the Gentiles and then returned home, the community would actually perform a ceremony called the Kezazah. The whole community would meet the son at the city gate. They would break a large clay pot on the ground in front of the son and yell, "You are now cut off from your people." It's not just the father. The entire community would totally reject him. Also, it's very important to note that during this ceremony of the breaking of the clay pot, the father was not allowed to be present. He needed to remain emotionally separated from the son and from the ceremony. The mother could attend and pray and beg for mercy for the son, but not the father. So now, here is this son, knowing full well what awaited him back home, planning what he would say to his father, repeating it over and over. Should he make it past the ceremony of the Kezazah, he will offer himself as an outsider. He'll offer himself as a hired hand. He'll offer himself as a slave. Because of the system, this is his only option. I cannot stress this enough. Except when the father catches wind of his son heading home, he starts running out toward his son. Much has been written about the significance of the father running. Traditionally, again, I preach and have preached before that before we even ask forgiveness of God, God meets us to forgive. God can't wait to forgive. God runs to us to forgive. Or perhaps in the excitement or joy in seeing the son return home, it causes him to act in an unpatriarchal way. Or the fact that he showed his legs running, which would never have been done by a first century dignitary, illustrating how God is a God who will go to any lengths to bring about reconciliation. All that is fine, all that is true, is true. But what if the reason the father took off running toward his son so he could get to that son before he reached the city gate? What if the father runs and shames himself that way in an effort to get to the son before the community gets to him, so that his son does not have to experience the same shame and humiliation that their taunting and rejection did to him? Think about it. If the father heard about the son returning home, then no doubt the villagers would have heard about it as well. They would have also been on their way, maybe following the running father. They would have witnessed what took place on the edge of the village between the father and the son. After this emotional reuniting of the prodigal son with his father, it was clear, and would have been clear to the villagers, there would be no Kezazah ceremony. There would be no way now to reject this son, despite what he has done. The son had repented, turned around, returned to his father. The father had taken the full shame that should have fallen upon the son, clearly shown to the entire community that his son was welcome, and his son was back home, and it was his son. And the father broke every rule of patriarchy to do it. He broke with the system he had held in check for so many years to ensure his family's wealth. He broke with every system that would ensure his safety and his security and the inheritance for generations to come. He turned the rules of society on its head in order to bring healing and reconciliation to the prodigal, and he was willing to endure the consequences. Amen.
Amen.
This is what Jesus is talking about and asking of us in the Beatitudes. Our world, our society, our systems and rules and boundaries and borders must come undone in order to usher in the reign of God in our midst. We must be willing to imagine a world where forgiveness and relationships rise above formality and rules, where we are willing to risk showing our legs or becoming undignified or shamed by others in order to model God's grace. Take a breath. Because there's a little bit more to the story. The father decides to have a party, yes? Imagine this. Not only is the father breaking the law, he's so filled with the joy of reconciliation that he's celebrating with all he has. And make no mistakes, as much as it will celebrate the son's return, and it will, this party also celebrates the father's withdrawal from the system. He can't go back. It honors the father's sacrifice of dignity, of position, of security in order to show mercy and love and forgiveness, the Father reinstates his Son with all the accoutrements of a full heir, a royal robe, a ring. The son of mine was lost and now is found. At the same time he's reinstating his Son, he is pulling himself back out of the system through non-compliance. Non-violent non-compliance. Pulling him out of a system that excludes and does not forgive. As you would expect, as some of you may have experienced, the Father's first criticism of his actions to have a party come from those closest to him and those who subsequently might be affected by them. The elder brother voices our own reluctance to accept this new teaching. Wait! That's not fair. What about me? Where does this leave me? What about my security? What about my inheritance? My future's at stake too. My money, my safety, my status. Where's my party? And despite the Father's explanation, we don't know if the brother went and celebrated, or if he stayed sulking and brooding, or even if he may have gone to try to disavow himself from his father's actions in front of the other powerful patriarchs. We don't know. But his presence in the story invites us to think about our own participation in this movement called the Kingdom of God. How far are we willing to go? How much grace is too much? What boundaries or norms or rules have we set up around God and Christian living, and why have we put them there? And most important, what if we broke them down? What could be possible? What could God do if we decided to go to the party? What could God do if we, like the Father, were willing to sacrifice all for healing and reconciliation? What could God do if we, like the prodigal, were willing to offer ourselves as a servant first, without the expectation of the robe and the ring? What could God do if, after all we've been through, we decide to come running toward one another in love? No boundaries. No borders. No ceremony. I don't know where you are today. If you're far off, if you're the Father, I do know this, that you are in a community that will not break a clay pot at your feet. That the kingdom of God is an inclusive place where no one gets excluded no matter what. As we go into this quick time of reflection, and I guess what I'd like to ask you or invite you to do, if you don't pick up your bulletins, is to just imagine yourself in the story. The imagine line from John Lennon today was, imagine all the people living life in peace. Let's think about what that peace might mean, what might have to be sacrificed, and how willing we are to go to embrace it. God bless you.